South Africa is looking at 0% economic growth this year. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. It warns that things are going to get worse without the right reforms. According to some experts, this is the result of bad policy choices, a decline in governance and a lack of proper leadership. Let's discuss this now with the impact that it has on the country. Let's speak to local government analyst and research fellow at the University of the Free State, Dr. Harlan Cloete. Dr. Cloete, thank you very much for speaking to us here on eNCA. So we've spoken about policy and how, some analysts would say that it's not necessarily the policies that are wrong, but it's the implementation thereof. Let's talk about governance and look and zoom into a city such as the city of Johannesburg, where we've seen leadership change a lot. Obviously, that also has a lot to do with the problems we face today.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. You are correct. Governance is, in one word, behavior. And if you look at how our politicians behaving in terms of managing our institutions, remember that the electorate, by voting, we entrust them with a mandate to govern on our behalf. And so I would say, if you look at how politicians are behaving, it doesn't bode well. It doesn't put confidence into people, into ordinary people, especially young people, to have faith in this democratic project.
And, Mr. Cloete, I've always been interested to know what an analyst like you would think. Government always, we've always said that there should be a clear separation of power, right, between government and the political party that governs, right? And government will always look to remind, especially young journalists, about that separation of power. But, do they sometimes do it when it only benefits them?
Look, it's a thin line, that there has to be that separation. Remember, political parties exist and they compete so that they can ultimately govern the state. And so the state is permanent. Governments, they come and go. So political parties, the currency of political parties is power. They want to make sure that they govern the state on behalf of the people. And so there is this thin line between the state and the party. But ultimately, it comes down to behavior. Are we then, that's how we can talk about state capture, because instead of the state exists to look after the welfare of the people. The state in crisis is and when that government manages the state in such a way, in an irresponsible way. And I think if we look at the NDP, that the NDP review, which is a frank admission by government that it is failing in its objective to make sure that we put an end to poverty, unemployment, and inequality.
I'm glad you brought the NDP into this conversation, Doc, because if you look at it, these are not, the NDP obviously mentions a lot of prospects for 2030. Right? And we are about 7 years to 2030. And even we can all see that some of those prospects we're not going to reach. But at the same time, government not wanting us to hold them accountable when they set those deadlines for themselves. No. We must hold them accountable. The NDP admission is a frank, it says that we are failing in our economic targets. It says clearly in the NDP review that we have got serious governance challenges instead of a capable state. The NDP talked about a capable state. In other words, the state is in a position to be able to deliver the expectations that people have. Now, instead of a capable state, we have a corrupt state. The NDP frankly admits that our planning is in disarray. What government says and what government do is completely different. If we look at our economic problems, is that our economic policies that we've had in this country, the World Bank last year confirmed South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And so there's a frank admittance from the side of government that we do not have our ducks in a row. And then it goes on to say that, in order to get us out of this mess, it needs almost like a social compact or a new solidarity between the government, the private sector, business, and the academia. And so academia can't be in an ivory tower divorced from the realities on the ground. And so our actions, our collective action should be working towards one common goal. I am afraid if we look at the 2030 ambitious targets that were set by the NDP, government says we're not going to meet this. So unless we have a rethink or a reset of our relationships with one another, we will be having this conversation forever and a day, analyzing what is wrong, but not having the courage to do something about the problem. Because the NDP also says that to get us out of this mess requires leadership and an active citizenry. A citizenry that's not just content to sit down and analyze what is wrong, but have the courage to do something about the problem. And it's a call to action.
And Doc, looking at the NDP as well, maybe, I don't know, maybe government didn't think that 2030 would come as quickly as it did, maybe when they actually presented it for the first time. But it also speaks about raising employment via fast economic growth. But if you look at it and how the economy did grow, at least in the last quarter of this year, it was just 1.1%. And that's very far from the targets that they have set themselves.
I think, the business community sometimes complain that the government is very hostile towards it. I was speaking to a colleague of mine in the Free State, and they've got a project there, Rural Free State, which they want to get off the grid and using solar energy. Sometimes government, business, they receive, business is very hostile. Government is very hostile towards business. That is the one complaint from business. So if we're going to have faster economic growth in this country, government will have to change their attitude. And it again comes down to behavior. If we say that government is not an employment agency, the president is on record and saying government is not an employment agency, it must create that conducive environment. Increasingly, the business community is saying you are not creating that favorable environment for us to thrive and to create this job. It's overregulated. If we go to communities, we'll have the same complaint, because you see the love or the indifference of the state is experienced at the local government level. And if we look at the local government, there you will find that there's social distance between what the council thinks that they are doing well and how it is received by the community. Instead of solving the complex problems in local government, we find councillors fighting amongst themselves and not really focusing on working with communities. And sometimes it's like they're doing communities a favor. You must please help us. It is not recognizing the asset and the intellect and the intel within communities and harnessing that together. And so the NDP makes a bold statement by saying it's a call to action. If we are going to change, we need to change the trajectory in this country. That means we have to reset and rethink about how do we co-govern. How do we, because government sometimes, they're not listening. Now, if they're really listening, they will. If we look at what happened in the November 21 local government election, we've had such a poor turnout. And so the young people are saying, why should I vote? Why should I participate? Why should I care? Because if I look at what you're doing, all that I'm seeing is this narrative of you're only interested in yourself, you behave so badly, you fight with one another, and you're only interested in what you can get out of the system and not what you can give. And so we need innovative solutions from all sectors of society.
Doc, thank you so much for your time here on eNCA. We've run out of time to continue with that conversation. I would have loved to know from the Doc if we have been able to achieve any of the goals set out in the NDP. For instance, it says building the capacity of a state to play a developmental and transformative role. We all know some of the laws that have been brought in by at least the Minister of Employment, that is Tulas Mngesi, in terms of trying to make sure that we are able to see transformation, especially in the private sector. And I just wanted to know if he thinks it's all doom and gloom, or are we actually reaching some of those goals? Local government analyst and a research fellow at the University of the Free State, Dr. Harlan Cloete.